Should be good. Awesome. Yay. We are now live.
Yay!
I know people are probably just preparing themselves and stepping in, but I think, for so that we do justice to the conversation, I'll say, let's start. Welcome, everyone. I know that probably people joining us via LinkedIn and Facebook who may not necessarily be able to pick up on the stream, but welcome to yet another installment of the Full Color Leader Series conversations. My name is Bongeka Mhlongo. I'm the author of Thinking in Full Color, which is really, I guess, the foundation of today's conversation, because we've termed these Full Color Leader Series conversations, which really about having these interesting conversations about these different topics that really are meant to make our world a much more beautiful place. I'm really quite excited today to have Suki join us all the way in Boulders, right? In
Colorado, yeah.
Colorado in the US. I believe it's 10 a.m. that side. It's 6 p.m.
Yeah, it's 10 a.m.
It's 6 p.m. this side of the world. Suki, thank you so much for joining us. To the guys who are just stepping in, please feel free to share with us or say something in the comments, say a hello, so that we are not alone. We know that we have people, and we will definitely be taking questions right at the end. But for now, I think it's important that we just do justice to this conversation that we have termed, or the topic that we have termed, feminine leadership, stepping into our feminine superpowers. Okay, before we get to the meat of the conversation, I just want to start with maybe people who don't know you and haven't been exposed yet to your body of work. I would love to give you an opportunity to just introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. Okay. Well, it's really, really great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me and to sharing this space with you, sharing your space with me. It's really wonderful to be here. In terms of my background, I've started my career in the corporate world in investment banking, and I worked at large corporations like Walt Disney Company and News Corporation, doing business planning and strategic planning and financial modeling and forecasting. And so I come from a very kind of logical business, masculine world. Oftentimes I'm the only woman in a boardroom of men. I'm sure many of us are, familiar with this situation, right? So that's kind of where I came from. And then, during that time, there was a part of me that was aching and longing that there was something missing. So, not recently, and probably over a decade ago, I kind of completely shifted the way I work. And, that's a time when I wrote Alphabet to Enchantress. So taking on these kind of the masculine qualities that made me successful in the corporate world, and then what was missing and what was emerging for me. And then, so that is what gave birth to the book, Alphabet to Enchantress. So we're really talking about feminine superpowers and how that served me and how that enabled me to kind of shift my thinking and how I engage the world and how I work. And not just my work, but also relationship with my husband and my children and whatnot. Yeah. So I guess I could, to sum it up, I am an entrepreneur, I am an author, and I'm a coach advisor to not just women, but mostly women. Yeah. So yeah, that's a quick intro.
This is the book.
Yeah. Thank you.
This is the book that connects Suki and I tonight. So I was mentioning to Suki just before we went live that my dear, she's a mentor, she's a coach, she's a friend, she's like a mother to me. Caroline gifted me with this book in December, and it was supposed to be my Christmas read. But every year, for some reason, December gets quite hectic in South Africa. But every year before I start the year, there's, as part of my prayer and my intention for the year, there's always I pray about a book that I need to read because, as I mentioned, I believe that books are spiritual messages. And Suki's book was the one screaming. And oh my goodness, I read this book and it just, each page I was just connecting with it. And it came at such an opportune time and it's such an ideal time in my life. And I think it's such a powerful and necessary message around, femininity and feminine leadership and the reconnection to our feminine qualities, particularly as women, where we have been so socialized to be so masculine and and all of that. And what an incredible! It's like even reading it, it was almost like I could remove the load off my shoulders. So before we get into the conversation, I like us to play a little quiz.
Sure.
Even though some people may still feel my quiz is a bit nerdy, but it's okay.
Okay.
Right?
I like it.
So I'm going to read out just a couple of statements to you. These statements are just based on, some of what I've heard about femininity, feminism, and just also some of the concepts that people may be thinking about already. And I'm going to read out the statement and you will say whether that statement is a truth or it's a myth.
Okay, sounds good. Let's do it.
All right. So statement number 1. Femininity and feminism is exactly the same thing.
No, definitely not. We had a conversation to length about this, but to me, feminism, do you want me to go into why I think so, or do I actually say yes or no? How do you want to do this?
So for now, you just say truth or myth, and then we will launch into our conversation where then we will decode some of these things. But just to leave people more curious so that they hear where you're coming from when we delve into the convo.
Yeah.
So femininity and feminism is exactly the same thing. You say myth.
Myth. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Statement number 2. Feminine leadership often encourages a flatter organizational structure, promoting collaborative decision making.
Yes. Truth.
Okay. Femininity is associated with enchanted empowerment.
Yes. Truth.
All right. Feminine leadership emphasizes the importance of nurturing relationships and creating a sense of connection and collaboration.
Truth.
Okay. Being a highly independent woman and not needing anyone is one of the feminine superpowers.
Myth. No.
Only women can have feminine superpowers.
Oh, myth. No.
All right. The ability to understand, adapt, embody, and share the feelings of other human and non-human beings is a powerful feminine trait known as shape-shifting.
Yes. Truth. Truth.
Okay. All right. The underlining message that is often associated with why we need to explore feminine superpowers is about highlighting how women possess unique strengths that are worth celebrating.
Truth.
Truth. Okay. And the final statement, feminine leadership encourages the integration of both traditionally feminine and traditionally masculine qualities for a more balanced approach to leadership.
Truth.
Beautiful. Beautiful. All right. Thank you for being a sport.
You're very welcome.
Now I would want us, Suki, to maybe start right at the beginning.
Sure.
In terms of unpacking this. So in your own words and in the most simplest definition, what is femininity?
So in the English language, because of the lack of a word like this, femininity and masculinity to me is like we're kind of borrowing on gender and typical gender qualities to basically describe a set of characteristics. in, leaning on my tradition of Taoism, there's a word yin and yang. I'm sure, many of us have heard yin and yang, right? So yang would be equivalent to the masculine qualities, and yin is equivalent to the feminine qualities, right? So masculine is kind of the more visible, feminine is the more invisible. Masculine is kind of like, if the masculine is the day and what's visible in the bright lights, and the feminine is the the night. You look at a tree, the masculine might be the branches and the leaves of the tree, and the feminine, the yin quality, is the root system that basically goes into the earth and nurtures that tree. So feminine qualities, or femininity, at least in the context that I am speaking of, is these yin qualities. And I can go into some of the more specifics. I don't know if you want me to jump into that right now. Okay, great. Yeah. So feminine, the yin, feminine qualities, and I kind of go into length of this in my book, is the first is fluidity. So flexibility, right? There's a yielding quality of it, but there's very powerful in this yielding quality, because, let's a huge boulder, water over time can shape that boulder. And it's more successful at shaping a huge rock than it is maybe like a hammer. If it's a huge boulder, you can chip away, but the water is more successful. So that's kind of that yielding quality that could also be extremely powerful. And then feminine qualities are emotional. And I think emotions have like somehow developed this bad rep, it's really, really unfortunate. But emotion is energy in motion. Without tapping into emotion, we are basically giving up so much of our power. Because if you really think about like how we make a decision, for example, we don't make a decision with pros and cons logical, right? It's an emotion. Every decision, even if you're a lawyer, there is an emotional quality to it, right? So when we cut off ourselves from that emotional, power, then that we're going to giving up part of our superpowers, men or women. So emotional versus intellectual. So the masculine, counterpart, that would be intellectual. I mean, fluidity, obviously, it's a fixed quality, stalwart, kind of like a fortress. Like that would be the masculine versus the fluid, which is kind of the, the flowy aspect. Then the third would be magnetic versus electric. Yeah. So we can kind of go into a long conversation. We could probably just have a conversation on this alone, but just to simplify, magnetic is a quality where, it's the type of power that allows you to bring things into you. Whereas the electric powers is kind of exerts its force upon others, right? It's like the doing, versus the magnetic is kind of a being state, right? Yeah. And this is something that's really, I think, important. As I think one of the key elements of feminine quality is that, how many times have you worked really, really hard and you feel like your head is banging against the wall? Like you're doing and doing, and you're still not getting the results you want. Yeah. And then magnetic quality is about sitting back, really connecting deeply. And then, you know what? Sometimes completely out of the blue, and sometimes even miraculously, things just come to you. You never expected it. And so like cultivating your magnetic qualities, so that's a huge, huge one. Intuitive versus logical, right? So logical is what's part of the conscious mind. And and we talked about this, right? Like masculine, feminine, there's no good or bad. It just is. And we're talking about kind of polarizing, the polarities of each of these aspects. So intuitive versus logical, you need both. But I think in our society, and the feminine qualities that are missing is the intuitive, and really appreciating that intuitive quality. I talk about this in my book, but the conscious mind, or the visible spectrum, like our ears, our senses, which is the basis of logical mind, is like the input from the senses, right? So those senses are limited, right? We can only see 0.003% of the light spectrum. This is like a sliver of what we hear. Our hearing, right? Dogs can hear better than us. There's so much, right? Kind of the ability for a conscious mind to process anything is very limited compared to what's really sensorily coming into our body. The intuition allows us to actually kind of for insights to arise naturally, rather than from the conscious mind thinking through things. This kind of connects to embodiment, which I'm going to talk a little bit about as well, because it's really like unearthing the knowledge and the wisdom in your body, not just your
Mm.
logical mind, and that's where intuition comes from. So
Sure.
that's a quality. You talked
Mm.
about this in the quiz.
Yeah.
Nurturing versus inspiring. You know, a
Yeah.
feminine leader or feminine quality leadership is about nurturing those connections and leadership,
Mm.
and kind of moving forward the organization or the community in that way. Whereas the masculine aspect is inspiring, like being this kind of like out there
Mm.
example. And there's beautiful qualities to that. I know women can be inspiring as well,
Yeah.
but to the thing is, whereas one is much more visible in the way they lead, the
Mm.
nurturing quality is kind of like from the behind, whereas the other one is kind of from the front, right?
Yeah.
So that's the contrast. And then inclusive via hierarchical. We talked about a flat organization. Feminine quality leadership
Mm.
encourages a more flatter organization, allowing for sort of like, input from all directions. Whereas the masculine is hierarchical or
Mm.
orderly, if you want. And there's nothing wrong with this. I mean, because I have seen organizations where,
Mm.
with the best of intentions, they try to make the most flat organizations possible. At the end of the day, sometimes somebody has to make a decision, right? There's an
Yeah.
executive decision that needs to be made by some individual. And I have seen organizations that really, really try to do this completely flat. There's a combination. All of these qualities, there's a combination that needs to work together. And then natural, wild. So natural versus civilized and structured. Again, going back to
Mm.
sense of order, right? So like the
Mm.
feminine is natural and wild and organic. And
Sure.
then the masculine is kind of like, you think like nature, the mountains, the oceans versus like the city life, right? Or suburban.
Yeah.
That's the kind of a contrast. However, going back to the yin and yang aspect of it, the yang gives birth to yin and the yin gives birth to yang. So if you
Yeah.
actually take even nature, which seems completely organic and sporadic, and right, when you think about how like a vine grows, but when you look at the DNA structure of it, when you look at the fractal dynamics of it,
Mm.
there's immense amount of math in
Mm.
that organic nature. So there
Yeah.
it's hidden in each other, right? So that's kind
Oh.
of a really interesting example of the polarity giving birth to each other. Um, and the last quality I talk about is embodiment.
Mm.
Embodiment versus conceptual and mental. So the masculine is conceptual and mental, whereas the
Mm.
feminine is embodied.
Ooh.
There is so much wisdom in our body, that sensual quality. I'm not just talking about erotic, but even the kind
Mm.
of an innocent sensual quality that children have, right? Seeing
Mm.
something for the first time and being able to kind of engage the world in that way with our full body and feel it. So many of us are completely disconnected from our body. We like operate here,
Yeah.
feel our bodies, you know,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
sometimes, when you go on vacation, all of a sudden you get sick because you finally get to relax after a really, really busy period. Yeah,
Mm.
and because we're so disconnected from our bodies and we're not listening to the needs of our bodies. And, our bodies, there's a kind of disconnect between the
Yeah.
mind and the body, or the spirit and
Mm.
the body, and the body somehow kind of like, in a lot of religious traditions, it's kind of the source of evil, like lust,
Mm.
hunger, like those
Mm.
type of things are kind of
Mm.
associated with the desires of the body. And therefore, no, there is so much beauty in the body. There's so much wisdom in the body. And
Oh,
so that's kind of, and then obviously the masculine counterparts, the conceptual, the mental. So
wow.
that's kind of a summary of something. This is we're just, scratching the iceberg here. But I think that kind of gives you a pretty good idea of representation of the two different qualities I'm talking about. Yeah.
And so thank you for just, explaining this so beautifully. I mean, obviously
Mhm.
I've read the book, and you're so right about the our connection to our bodies.
Mm.
And one of the things, as I was reading your book,
Mhm.
um, I realized that I like to, like, even when I'm listening to music or something,
Mhm.
it's almost like the sound wants to live through my body, and I just want to dance it through. But
Yeah.
we live in a world where I remember a friend of mine commenting, say, "Oh my goodness, yeah, stop it," because I was just dancing on,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was in a public place, and I was like, and I just allowed the sun, but it was almost as if you're not allowed to do that, because it's that thing that you
100%.
say, we live in a world where I felt that the sound wanted to live through me.
Yeah.
And every time I dance and I'm present in my body, like
Yeah.
even like and I think about it, it heals me. It heals me in
Yes.
dimensions and in ways I cannot explain. So
Yes.
it's become a part of my ritual. But again, in the world, it's almost frowned upon you where you can't just stand. Oh my God, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Oh, stop
Yeah.
it!
Yeah.
Because we over worship a particular narrative that we must be rigid and super
Civilized. Yeah.
civilized.
Yeah.
So I love it so much that all those different elements that you touch on. And again, guys, I really would highly recommend that you get Suki's book,
Yeah.
Alphabet to Enchantress. It is so incredible. Now, one of the things we also spoke about when we were
Yeah.
just catching up was I was telling you that one of the things I loved about your book so much,
Mm.
and I think Caroline, who gifted me with the book, uh, it was birthed from the conversation I've had with her, where I was saying I struggle with the whole concept of feminism,
Mm.
um, because I've always just felt that maybe it's particularly in my country,
Yeah.
the feminists were very angry. Like they were always angry at men,
Yeah.
and they hate men. I was
Yeah.
like, I don't hate the brothers. I
Right.
don't hate them.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
love men. I don't hate them.
Yeah.
And I couldn't really connect, but at the same time, I've always just believed in woman empowerment because
Mhm.
I think I've always been raised by parents who gave me a platform, and always my voice always mattered. I've never felt that my contribution to the world is diminished because I'm a woman.
Mm.
So, and sometimes when you're very expressive, people will say you're a feminist, and it almost felt that definition felt like I don't really
Yeah.
that
Identify. Mm.
but femininity feels like home to
Mm.
me. It's like, oh my gosh, yes.
Yes.
So maybe, can you maybe unpack for us a bit,
Yeah.
how is femininity
Mhm.
different from feminism? Because I think sometimes men confuse,
Yes.
uh, or not just men actually, that maybe there is sometimes a confusion in society around femininity and feminism.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So, we in their quiz, your first question was, is feminism and femininity the same? Absolutely not. Feminism is kind of in a way like in the
Mm,
masculine domain, meaning that it is a social activities done to promote the rights of a particular gender, in this case, women. That is
mm,
feminism, right? Whether it's promoting kind of, women authors or voting rights or, all those kind of things, that's feminism. And, you know, that's a social act, right? Now, that could be done in a feminine way and a
mm,
masculine way. But I
yes.
really challenge the feminists out there. You are promoting the feminine agenda. Are you really tapping into the feminine qualities, or are you just basically a man in a skirt? Like, are
Ooh,
you really engendering, real? Because the thing is, quite frankly, if those type of feminists that I know you're talking about, that are
mm,
angry, that are
mm,
polarizing,
mm,
you're not really any better than the men, because you'll be just as tyrannical, because you're going to think women are superior. No,
yeah,
we need to find harmony.
yeah,
Femininity is about harmony, whereas masculinity is about order. And we need both. We need harmony and order, right?
beautiful.
So
Yeah.
that's what I would say between feminism and
Mm,
femininity. I would love to see more feminists that are feminine. Right? And I would like to see more leaders in all sense, like in community leaders or corporate leaders that are more feminine and have those qualities and balance, not just women, but men too, really
yeah,
appreciating these qualities. Yeah.
so incredible.
Yeah.
And there's a story you talk about, or a case study
Mm.
you share in the book that
Yeah.
I so loved.
Hmm.
Particularly, we're in this period around diversity and inclusion. It's a big topic,
Hmm.
across the globe.
Yeah.
And you share an interesting, I guess, thought or
Hmm.
dimension around diversity and inclusion.
Hmm.
And I just loved it so much where, you shared an example that it's not so much, I think systematically we obviously always argue for more women. Well,
Mm.
right now, diversity
Mm.
and inclusion programs, more women in the workplace. But
Mm.
you pose a question, or you pose a challenge to us that it's not so much about more women,
Mm.
but it's about what qualities are those women bringing into the organization. Because
Yeah.
if we have women who are very masculine and are
Yeah.
operating at a very masculine energy,
Mm-hmm.
is that really going to move us forward? So I want you to maybe
Mm-mm.
unpack that a bit for us, and
Sure.
in unpacking, maybe talk about why should we call upon this urgency to introduce more
Mm-hmm.
feminine attributes to our different workspaces?
Mm-hmm. Again, one of your questions is, can men have feminine qualities? Absolutely. And in fact, there are, especially in kind of the older generation, and, like these qualities were needed for that first generation of women, like fighting for rights in terms of like, in
Yeah.
government or in corporate worlds, those first pioneering women. Yes, they had to have a lot of masculine, energy to break through. But what happened with that is that there are a lot of women that became very masculine in their ways, um,
Mm,
and instead of promoting inclusivity and nurturing qualities, they behave just like men because they had to break into that world, to break into where they are. Right
wow.
now, the world is changing. Like now, we need to bring in more harmony. I think, like,
Mm,
if I were to summarize, masculine versus feminine, in like a kind of two aspects, is heart-centeredness is feminine.
oh,
Heart-centeredness is feminine, whereas
mm,
the masculine is mental or
mm,
brain-centered, right? There's not. I
mm.
mean, we need both. Again, I say this over and over again. Yeah,
Yeah,
but the thing
yeah,
is, what we're missing, or we have missing for a long time, is this heart-centeredness.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
if I could find a different word to say men, feminine, that would be heart-centeredness, heart-centered leadership. So men who are heart-centered in their leadership. And when I think when people talk about heart-centeredness, they kind of think, oh, it's kind of wishy-washy. You become a doormat.
Yeah,
No. If you're
no.
a mother, I'm a mother. I'm a mother of two boys that are very willful. If I was just kind of like do whatever they want and I just nice girl all the time, then they would have probably sugar, chocolate, brownies for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And do it. No, there is a
With that.
fierceness to the feminine
Yeah,
as well, right? As a mother bear, it's probably the scariest, like when a mother is trying to protect their child, they can be the most fierce and most powerful beings. And so
sure.
there's definitely that quality too. So yeah, I mean that's why, in terms of the feminine and masculine, the feminine in no way is meek. That's the furthest thing from the truth, right? But it's
Yeah.
not outwardly violent. It's not outwardly aggressive.
Mm.
Yeah.
I love what you said so much. Oh man, like you just, I mean, we could, as I said, we could go on and on. But there's something about what you said about this concept of heart-centeredness, right?
Mhm.
And for me, it reminds me of also the point you mentioned earlier, connects to it around, a leadership that is perhaps more intuitive.
Mm,
And because why this heart-centeredness becomes, so my lights just went
that's okay.
off. I'm like
Oh no.
wondering what's up with my lights.
There you go.
Like,
I can see you now.
um, but I love the concept of heart-centeredness because it's almost like meeting the people and being able to be intuitive around what people need at that moment as a leader,
Mm,
and not falling into a script. Because I think
mhm.
sometimes in our workspaces, especially in big corporates, I don't know if you've ever picked this up. There's almost the script that people come into a boardroom and people say the same thing, or what will be socially acceptable.
Mhm.
But the minute as a leader, you begin to tap into your intuition and feel that there's something else much more going on here,
Yeah.
which connects more to the heart. You're almost seen as, ooh, now
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
talking, but that's where the shift began. That's the
Yeah.
real transformation. So I
Mhm.
really connect to that and I resonate with it.
Mhm.
But it's a very courageous
Mhm.
journey
Mhm.
um, in a world that over worships logic and groupthink and
Mhm.
and group belonging.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
In terms of the intuitive, I remember reading this book by Oliver Sacks. He's a neuroscientist, and he has some really great books out there. But he talks, and he's a neuroscientist, so he actually uses specific case studies of people who had brain damage or have, very unique neurological issues. And they were talking about this very successful lawyer who had a car accident, and there was a part of his brain that got damaged. And this is the kind of the part of the brain that apparently is connected to the intuitive qualities. So after, he recovered from his accident, he was able to go back to his work and write down the pros and cons of any case that he's working on. But he absolutely lost the ability to make any decisions and move forward. So eventually he had to stop working because he couldn't make any decisions. He could list the pros and cons, but from those pros and cons, he couldn't make a decision. Intuition allows us to tap all different sensory data, information, and it comes from a deeper place. The other thing that I kind of touch upon is that there's insight, there's intuition, and there's instinct, right?
Yeah.
There's 3 different levels of inner knowingness, right?
Yes.
Instinct is from the physical body, right? You know how when you sense danger, like your body, the hair in the back, stands up, and there's instinctual quality, right? It's the animal part of us. Insight comes from kind of the mental part of us, like the arising of a certain knowing. Intuition is a combination of all of those things, right? So intuition comes from the heart. Intuition is heart-centered knowing. Instinct is body-centered knowing, and insight is mind-centered knowing. Yeah.
Wow, I love how you just so simplify those so much, because sometimes I think people use insight and intuition interchangeably, but they are spectrums of knowing, but they in different ways. And I love how you just broke that down. In the book, also, Suki, your book was quite interesting. I remember Caroline and I talking about it.
That's great.
Because you also touch on, I guess, these supernatural, metaphysical elements, like shape shifting.
Yes.
And the story you talk about, which
yes,
I read that about 3 times because I don't think I was wanting to understand where you shifted into a black jaguar, right?
Yes.
And then you even have an exercise, which I haven't done because I'm like,
yeah.
But it's so fascinating, even just you sharing and being so, indulgent of just sharing some of the experiences you've had. I'm curious around, can you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Just for a second. Okay, cool. Can you just maybe talk to us a bit? What's that about? And maybe
shape-shifting.
This concept of shape-shifting to people who may never have heard of it.
Yeah. So let me put it in a very practical way to start, and then I can kind of touch upon the mystical aspect of it. The very practical way to start is, especially women, less so for men, but especially for women, our roles in life and the way we're supposed to show up completely drastically shift, right? From the girl, the young girl, to be, the pretty girl, the good girl. And then there are certain qualities and expectations around, the young girl, the maiden, right? And then you become a mother. And then all of a sudden the expectations of you change as a mother and a wife, maybe as a lover, right? So if you think about what qualities are desired in a young girl, is they're obedient, they're sweet, that's it, right? And as a mother, they're nurturing and giving and whatever. As a lover, as a wife, perhaps you're erotic and sensual, right? All of these are different faces of who we are and what we become. But if you think about a boy's journey, it doesn't change that drastically in terms of their quality, right? So, and then add that to corporate world. Now, all of a sudden we have to show up more masculine with those kind of qualities. So in a way, we're constantly shape-shifting to the different roles that we play in society already. And women have to be more fluid. Now, what I do in my book and some of my own personal practices, I take that to the next level where I kind of epitomize that. And there's many ways to do it. And I think in our more indigenous shamanic traditions, this was kind of part of that play. One of my sort of spiritual traditions that I really draw heavily upon is Vajrayana Buddhism or Tantric Buddhism. So where, a lot of the spiritual practice is embodying a certain god or goddess or deity, right? It's not worshiping this god or goddess outside of you, but you become that quality, you become that goddess. And so a lot of in indigenous traditions, whether it's drumming or dancing, you talked about dance, where you start to channel different kind of energies. And it's not necessarily like you can do this in an intentional way, but in more in a natural way where it kind of arises out of you. And that Black Jaguar, Black Panther moment was, I was in this dance, this organic, ecstatic dance class. And then all of a sudden this aspect of me just arose and I just kind of became like this fierce creature. And and I had an amazing dance and really getting in touch with that part of my being. It's all part of me. So in terms of shape-shifting, consciously doing it is like understanding all the different parts of you, like as me as a lover and a wife versus me as a mother, me as a business leader or a mentor, right? And being able to kind of like consciously using maybe even archetypes. Archetypes is a good word also, to shape into different archetypes to really fulfill your role in each of those places. So that's what I mean by shape-shifting. And it's, on a practical level to the mystical level, it's a deeply enriching and also feminine quality. So, yeah.
Wow. So, I want to now, talk about how do we, we're talking about obviously femininity and all of these incredible qualities around femininity and our different superpowers. So tell us, how do we begin to step into these feminine superpowers and really, especially as women, yes, I know it's not only reserved for us, but begin to embody them? What are some of the practical ways somebody who's listening and is saying, geez, really want to connect to that part of me? Where can we start?
Yep. I'm not going to proselytize one particular path or the other. I think it could be reached in many, many different ways. But what I would like to say, in order to touch and cultivate your feminine qualities, you need to go quiet and listen inward. And so whether that's meditation, prayer, dance, whatever it is where you can kind of like put your ego mind, your logical mind aside and just kind of surrender into spirit, nature, God, whatever word works for you, and just kind of be a quiet listener. That's kind of one way, like one tool. One is more of a conscious thing is like, how can you engage in everything you do in a heart-centered way? Right? So like, to me, a sacred act is a heart-centered act, an act of love. And this doesn't have to be just in the context of like being a mom or a wife or, something like that. Even in the corporate setting, to your clients, to your colleagues, how can you show up in a heart-centered way? My kind of like other aspect of my business is very, very is business strategy. So I look at a lot of numbers and data and things like that. But still, even with that, in the context of that work, how could I make it heart-centered? How can I make it, in my way, sacred? Is coming from that place of service. And I'm going to use a big word, love. How can I come up and show up from a place of love? I think the context of love and work is like, no. Maybe you love your work, but you don't show up in love because there's like disconnect because you're supposed to show up to work in an intellectual, logical, like that kind of. No, but if you could show up in love to your workplace, instead of like work having to be some kind of discipline, it becomes almost emotional.
Yeah.
And it's more fulfilling and wholesome. Yeah.
I'm writing down notes, everybody. I'm learning as well. Wow, I'm listening to you, Suki. I'm just like, there's certain things you're saying that I want to capture for my own growth path. So that's why writing down helps me. So yeah, but I just wrote the statement: work as a devotion. I've like that. Just Sorry, proceed. Yeah.
I think that all of us come to world. I mean, we're talking about feminine superpowers. All of us come to this world with gifts. Yeah. And, like a lot of us like fear failure, right? Like we're not going to get that promotion or get that, whatever it is that we are desiring, and we fear failing. But what we perceive as failures are not really failures. There's actually lessons for learning. The only true failure is you not being able to share your gift. That would be the only true failure in life.
Sure.
Right? I mean, if you think about it, all failure, like I failed a lot, and I did things that way I wish I could have done differently, but each of those things made me learn from that situation. It was an opportunity for learning and growth. So failure is only like feedback to evolve who you are. Whereas the only true failure, and I'll say it again, is if when you are not able to share your gifts. That is the only way you can fail.
Sure.
So.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you for sharing, like, I guess, just some of the ways that we can begin to practically, step into our feminine superpowers. And for me, the thing around silence,
Mm-hmm.
one of my favorite things, I think in a world that is so noisy,
Yeah.
I've found that my solitude time and my time alone in prayer with God
Yeah.
is probably my favorite time.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably the best thing in my life. And it's so interesting that almost whatever you listen to, it always comes back to that aloneness and
Yeah.
that moment, and the heart centeredness doing place from a place of love.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about it in my book, one of the essays, and I was very anxious writing about it, but it was about, I posed it as, how about bringing your heart to work? Literally,
Yes.
that was the
Yes.
essay.
Uh-huh.
And I guess I was sharing my own story around how I had to reformat and recontract my relationship with work and
Mm-hmm.
purpose,
Mm-hmm.
and repurposing my purpose in the context of work. And my goodness, ever since I've done that, since I started years ago, work has been so nourishing, because you're
Yes.
right, you reposition it,
Mm-hmm.
you shift the narrative around what is
Mm-hmm.
work, and it's
Yes.
like, so when you said work as a format of devotion, or
Mm-hmm.
as a form of, so what an incredible way. I mean, I love these tools because it's things that people can immediately be able to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just want to check if there's questions um, from the audience. I'm also just going to check on LinkedIn quickly. I see on YouTube there aren't any questions as yet. I just want to quickly check on LinkedIn if
Mm-hmm.
there are any questions that have popped up. I see none have popped up as yet. So clearly, people are just you've articulated and answered it quite well.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, perhaps the I guess my final question for the day
Mm-hmm.
is, if we wanting to introduce these concepts, especially in our spaces of work. Yes, I know I'm talking a lot about work, but there are many spaces of leadership. You have,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, um, I mean, NGOs are spaces of work, but you have institutions like, the church and
Mm-hmm.
other religious institutions
Mm-hmm.
that have a format of leadership. You have government.
Mm-hmm.
How do we? Where do we start on this journey? Do we reach out to people like you to say,
Mm-hmm.
hey,
Mm-hmm.
we really want to begin to have this incredible balance of feminine and masculine, uh, and we want to equip our leaders with this competency?
Mm-hmm.
Where can we start on that journey?
Mm-hmm. I feel
Yeah.
like there's a lot of organizations now, corporate team building, those type of organizations that are, they're not calling it feminine qualities, but, Dan Goleman's work with, emotional EQ or emotional intelligence. Those are movements that are already happening. We're not labeling it as such. One of the things that I would really encourage, and I hear this, like, some of my clients, I was just very surprised to hear this, like, she was a business leader, and she said that she doesn't trust other women. Other women are catty and jealous. And I was
Sure.
like, you're a woman and you're saying these things.
Sure.
Right? And I am sure in the audience, some people can be like, yeah, that's true. I'm like, wait, let's start with us. Like,
Yeah.
instead of going outward,
Yeah.
power of the feminine is about community. It's about collaboration. It's about harmony, And then while the masculine is probably about the power of one, the feminine is the power of the collective, right?
Wow.
So like I would even encourage you to maybe pull together a women's group, create a community what you can find nurturing, right? And it could be more formal where maybe you make this initiative in your company and you start there, or it could be informal where like you just kind of get together with some of your female colleagues and start talking about like maybe reading a book, like my book would be one, or just kind of sharing each of their journeys. I mean, as women, we will go through things that are unique to women. Let's face it, we go through pregnancy and all the hormones that come with it, right? We go through menopause and you get into a senior place in your 40s and 50s, all of us, and you're going to go another hormonal. These are things that men do not experience. And where can we come to work and share these challenges with, So I think that my encouragement would be create a women's community. And then that could be, maybe 3 or 4 women together, getting together, both either maybe in a work context or outside of work, maybe some friends that you identify with, you can relate to, you can trust, and then just having a somewhat formal structured get together regularly, right? So that would be a place I would say to start.
All right.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, guys. I hope you noted that. I think this conversation is really just, as Suki said, contributing to an already incredible movement that's going on in the world. Some people don't necessarily call it feminine leadership, but I'm very comfortable with the term femininity. That divine feminine rising. I think it's a term that definitely resonates with me. Since we don't have, any more questions from the audience, I do want to encourage people to get Suki's book. Suki, I mean, obviously Caroline bought the book for me. We have it at all bookstores in South Africa, but I believe they can also find it on Amazon.
Amazon, right? Yes.
You can definitely get her book, and then my book is also available in South Africa on the Pen the Vision page, but also you can find it on Amazon as well. And yeah, I think, thank you so much to everybody who's joined the conversation, and to those who will listen to this, who are probably will only really just see the recording later. Thank you so much, and feel free to reach out to myself, to Suki, if there's any further questions just around this, and we need to just continue the conversation in some way. You have been so incredible. Thank you for indulging us with just your wisdom, your insights, and thank you for just this idea, that you laid down. It's because of this idea that the two of us can connect with different continents. But thank you for obeying this idea that came to you and transform my life, and I know it's going to transform so many people's lives. I don't know if you have any final concluding thoughts for our conversation before I give you back your day to start your day.
The thing that I would like to say to everybody is believe in yourself. Just take time to listen and believe in yourself and trust yourself. That would be my final parting words of wisdom.
Thank you so much. All right, everybody. To those in South Africa, have a great evening. To those in other parts of the world, have a great morning. Have a great day. And appreciate everybody just for being able to join us and be blessed.
Thank you both. It's really honored to be here. It was wonderful spending time with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.